Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is a really exciting night for us here at Library 21C in the Pikes Peak Library District to have our final APPR author of the season in, Gene Luen Yang. And I just wanted to say a few words. I'm Sean Anglem from the Community Engagement Office. And we were lucky enough, fortunate enough, to get Gene to be with us tonight. As his agent told me on my first or second phone call, oh, he's booked through 2017, forget it. Is that really? We've already picked the book. But through some nice conversations and a guy named Luigi who came to say, put her down, we got her to agree to have Gene here. So my first interaction with Gene was with this sign earlier today because I picked him up at DIA, and I had never spoken with Gene before, but we've had some great conversations just in the few hours we've been here, so I know that he'll really draw you in and bring you to understand a little bit about the life of a graphic novelist and artist. I think many of you, if not all of you, know something about Gene. How many have actually read the book? Okay, preaching to the choir tonight here. So I don't need to say much, other than if you haven't looked up his bio or looked up the list of books he has written, it is amazing. It really is amazing. I will admit that I wasn't that well informed on Gene's works when we first had the book suggested by our teen department as our young adult selection for APPR. But once I got to read about Gene and read the book, and then read the book again, and then read the book again, following the three different storylines, I was really intrigued. So you probably know some of these other titles: Boxers, Saints, The Shadow Hero with the Green Turtle from the 1940s. That's great. Avatar, The Last Airbender, which is a series that Gene was involved with. Level Up, The Eternal Smile, Gordon Yamamoto, and The King of the Geeks. I love that title. And on to Secret Codes, which he's working on now, and which I understand is a 6-part that he'll tell you a little bit more about in just a bit. And then one other thing that I learned tonight, because I've stopped buying comics, I'm sorry, I might start again, that Gene's been the writer of Superman of late. So if you're a Superman fan, you've been reading his works with that as well. He speaks all over the world at universities, schools, conventions, and libraries. So we're thrilled that he's at our library tonight. So the man that wrote about Kung Fu practicing Monkey King, I'd like to introduce to you Gene Luen Yang.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? Is the mic working okay? All right, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending this evening with me, especially nowadays when there's so much awesome stuff on TV. I really appreciate it. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more about myself. I am a cartoonist, which means I write and draw comic books and graphic novels. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. These are some of the books that I've done during these past 20 years. The ones in the corner over there, Boxers and Saints, is a 2-volume graphic novel all about the Boxer Rebellion. And so far, at least, this is my longest book. This is my longest project. It's a 2-volume graphic novel. The reason I got interested in the Boxer Rebellion is in the year 2000, Pope John Paul II canonized a group of Chinese Catholic saints. I grew up in a Chinese Catholic church, and my home church kind of flipped out about this because this is the very first time the Roman Catholic Church, this deeply Western institution, had acknowledged Chinese citizens in this special way. So they had all sorts of special masses and celebrations, and these festivities they inspired me to look into the lives of these newly canonized saints. What I discovered was that many of them had been martyred during the Boxer Rebellion, during this war that was fought on Chinese soil in the year 1900. They were killed primarily because back then, if you were of Chinese descent and you converted to a Western faith, you were seen as somebody who had betrayed your own culture, your own people, and your own family. The more I read about the Boxer Rebellion, the more I felt like it kind of mirrored this tension between Eastern and Western ways of thinking that I had felt in my own life as an Asian American. So I wanted to do a book about it. And as I was doing my research into the Boxer Rebellion, I couldn't decide who I thought the protagonists were, who the heroes were. And that's why I ended up doing 2 books. The 2-volume nature of this project is an expression of my own ambivalence, of my own indecision. The good guys in one book are the bad guys in the other. Now, recently, I've had 3 books come out since September. The first is the latest issue, the latest volume of this series. How many of you have ever seen a show called Avatar: The Last Airbender on Nickelodeon? Okay, awesome. If you did not raise your hand, you should feel a little bit ashamed because this is an amazing, amazing show. It ran on Nickelodeon from 2005 to 2008. And it was so popular that Nickelodeon decided to do the sequel show called The Legend of Korra, which recently wrapped up. This is a fantasy series, so it's set in a fantasy world. But it's a fantasy world that's based on real-world Asian and Inuit cultures. In the world of the Avatar, 70 years passed from the end of the first show to the beginning of this new one. So Nickelodeon asked a comic book company called Dark Horse Comics, one of the biggest comic book companies in America, to produce a series of graphic novels that would fill in this 70-year gap. One of the editors at Dark Horse was familiar with my work. She called me up. She asked me if I'd be willing to write these for them, and I jumped at the chance, simply because I am a huge, huge fan of that original series. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is probably the best written American-produced animated series ever. I've been doing these for about 4 years now. The best part of this gig is that I get to call Mike DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, the 2 animators who created this original show. And they totally call me back. It's awesome. The latest in the series is Smoke and Shadow, came out at the end of September. One of the other good parts of this gig is that the artist and I, the art is done by a Japanese studio called Gurihiru. What we get to do is we get to take concepts that Mike and Brian had originally created for the show, but couldn't fit in. So for instance, one of the concepts that they really wanted to explore but couldn't was they wanted to introduce a group of women warriors from the Fire Nation. If you're familiar with the show, you'll know that there's this group of women warriors in the Earth Kingdom called the Kyoshi Warriors. They wanted a Fire Nation version of these Kyoshi Warriors. That idea ended up on the cutting room floor. That's something that we actually pick up and we introduce in the comic. So in this volume, you'll be introduced to a group of women warriors called the Kamuri Kaji. The other book that came out recently was the latest issue of Superman. This is a brand new job for me. I started as the regular writer for DC Comics Superman in June with issue number 41 right here. Issue number 45 just came out recently. I am a lifelong superhero fan, so I grew up reading superhero comics. To get to work on the very first superhero ever is amazing. Did you all know this? That Superman is the very first superhero ever? Debuted in 1939 and was so popular that he actually started his own genre. Very, very few characters are able to say that. Now, the best part of this gig is that I get to work with an artist by the name of John Romita Jr. If you've read any superhero comics at all in the last 20 years, you will most likely know who John Romita Jr. is. He made a name for himself in the 90s working for Marvel. He did pretty much every Marvel character over there, but he's most well known for his work on X-Men and on Daredevil. You all know that show on Netflix right now, that Daredevil show that's kind of popular? That's largely based on John Romita Jr.'s work at Marvel. When I was in high school, I used to go to local comic book conventions and line up to get John Romita Jr.'s autograph. Now he and I are partners on Superman. It's kind of a crazy thing. So in this first storyline that John and I are doing, what happens is Lois Lane, one of Clark Kent's best friends, decides to reveal to the world that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person. She has very good reasons for doing it, but if you want to find out what those reasons are, you're going to have to read the book. The final of the books that have come out recently is Secret Coders. This is a book that I'm really excited about. It's a joint project between me and a friend of mine named Mike Holmes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about this book at the end of this presentation. For now, I want to talk about American-Born Chinese, which had the honor of being selected as one of the books for the All Pikes Peak Reads program this year. Thank you very much for doing that. That's absolutely amazing. The title of this presentation is American-Born Chinese Bonus Features, because I want this presentation to be a little bit like the bonus features that you get on DVDs and Blu-rays. You all know what I'm talking about? So you stick in the Blu-ray, and there's this little menu that comes up. Sometimes there'll be a little entry that says bonus features. You click on it, and then you get these interviews with actors and actresses and directors and other good-looking people about how they made this movie. This presentation is going to be a little bit like that, except instead of good-looking people, it's going to be me. And instead of a movie, I'm going to talk about how I put together this graphic novel. Specifically, I want to tell you where the ideas came from for this book. And second, I want to tell you why I decided to tell this story as a graphic novel. If you've read American-Born Chinese, you know that the book is made up of 3 different storylines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these storylines and tell you the origins. The very first storyline stars this character called the Monkey King. Now, the Monkey King is not my character. I did not invent him. He's actually this old Chinese legendary figure. He and I go back. We go way back. This is a picture of me when I was 3 years old. This is probably the cutest picture of me ever taken. It was kind of downhill after this. Now, I am the son of 2 immigrants. My mom was born in mainland China. My dad was born in Taiwan. They came over to the United States for graduate school, met, fell in love, got married, and had me. Growing up, storytelling was one of the primary ways that my parents interacted with me. Both my mother and father were avid storytellers, and I loved listening to their stories. My dad mostly made stories up off the top of his head. Most of his stories starred this Taiwanese village boy by the name of Atong, who I think was kind of a stand-in for him. So my favorite Atong stories were always kind of gross. My absolute favorite, for instance, when I was 6 years old, was the story about how Atong's dad would make him take a rice bowl and a pair of chopsticks, and then go out to the front of their house, and Atong would have to take those chopsticks and pick up all the cow manure in front of their house and stick it into the rice bowl. When I was 6 years old, I thought that was hilarious. To be honest, I still kind of think it's hilarious. But as an adult, I had a realization about my dad's stories, and that is, I think he was trying to use these Atong stories to get me to be grateful that he wasn't making me do those same sorts of chores. That was lost on me, however. My mom took a little bit more of a classy route. She had parents who were living in Asia when I was growing up, so she asked my grandparents to send over a whole bunch of Chinese language storybooks, and she would read to me out of these books at bedtime. Here are some of the actual books that sat on my childhood bookshelf. I basically pulled them off that shelf and scanned them to make this slide. As an adult, I had a realization about my mom's story as well, and that is how different these stories are from most stories that most kids in America hear at bedtime. Here's an example of what I'm talking about here. Can you see what's going on? This is an actual book from my childhood bookshelf. So just in case you can't tell what's happening, there is a young woman, a new mother, who is breastfeeding her own mom. Her own mom has gotten so old that she's lost all of her teeth and she can't eat any solid food, so she's slowly starving to death. And this young woman has to breastfeed her own mom while her toddler is crying in the corner because he's hungry. This was a collection of short stories aimed at kids around 7, 8, or 9 years old, all about filial piety, about caring for and respecting your parents. I am pretty sure if you go to your local Barnes & Noble, you will not be able to find an English translation of this book anywhere in that children's section. Of all of my mom's stories, my absolute favorite were about the Monkey King. Now, for a 6-year-old boy, the Monkey King had a lot of appeal. First, as a kid, I loved monkeys. And I think this is kind of true for all boys, maybe even all kids. This is something that DC Comics figured out. In the 1970s, they realized that when they had a monkey, ape, or gorilla on the cover of one of their comics, that particular comic would sell a little bit better. So they started putting monkeys, apes, and gorillas on all their covers, regardless of whether or not it had anything to do with the story inside. So kids love monkeys. Kids also love fighting. You all know this, right? Deep inside the heart of every kid, there's this little violent heart. So the Monkey King is actually kind of perfect. He is a kung fu fighting monkey. In addition, he also has these superpowers, kind of like an American superhero. He could call a cloud down from the sky and ride it around like a skateboard. He can grow and shrink with the slightest thought. He can pull a hair off of his head and blow on it, and it'll become a clone of himself. And my favorite aspect of the Monkey King when I was a kid, he had this magic stick that he would use to beat people. So the stick, like himself, could grow and shrink. Normally, he would keep it the size of a toothpick tucked behind his ear. Then when he would fight, when he would need to fight, he'd pull it out, he'd think about it, it'd grow into a staff, he'd beat somebody down, and then when he was done, he'd shrink it back down and stick it back behind his ear. As a kid, I thought the Monkey King was amazing. A lot of times at bedtime, my mom would ask me, would you like to hear about the Monkey King, or would you like to hear about that young lady who breastfeeds her own mom? And I would always choose the Monkey King. Because of this deep childhood connection with this character, when I started doing comics as an adult, I knew I wanted to do something with the Monkey King. So I began to research. And what I discovered is that the Monkey King occupies this very unique space in Chinese culture, in Asian culture in general, really. First, the Monkey King is a literary figure. His story was first written down about 500 years ago in a novel called Journey to the West. And in China, Journey to the West is considered one of the 4 pillars of Chinese literature. It's held in the same esteem as we here in the West would hold the works of Shakespeare or of Mark Twain. It's a big deal over there. If you visit China, you'll find all sorts of traditional Chinese arts all about the Monkey King. They'll have traditional Chinese brush paintings. They'll have traditional Chinese opera about the Monkey King. If you visit the palaces, the palace walls will be decorated with paintings of the Monkey King and his friends. He's a really big deal over there. He's this old literary figure, kind of like Hamlet. But not only is he like Hamlet, he is also like Mickey Mouse. Not only is he literary, he is also popular. They don't just have these traditional arts about the Monkey King, they also have Saturday morning cartoons of the Monkey King, and t-shirts, and lunchboxes, and comics. In fact, over in Asia, the Monkey King is so popular that he is almost his own genre. So over here, we have science fiction, action-adventure, romance. Over there, they have science fiction, action-adventure, romance, and Monkey King. Monkey King's so popular, he gets his own shelf. When I discovered this, I started feeling a little bit intimidated. Any of you seen this show called Dragon Ball Z? You know what that is? Okay, a few of you. It's a pretty popular Japanese animated series that's based on a Japanese comic book series. And a lot of people don't realize this, even Dragon Ball Z fans. But Dragon Ball Z is actually a modern retelling of Journey to the West. If you read Journey to the West and you watch those early episodes of Dragon Ball Z, there's actually a one-to-one correspondence between all of the major characters. So what I realized is that in Asia, the Monkey King is so popular that almost every working cartoonist has done something with him. The image over here on the right is from an adaptation of Journey to the West done by a Japanese cartoonist by the name of Osamu Tezuka. Now, here in the States, Tezuka is most well known as the creator of Astro Boy. But in Japan, he did thousands and thousands of pages of comics, hundreds and hundreds of stories in practically every genre. In Japan, Tezuka is so influential and so well known that they actually have statues of him and his creations all over the country. The Japanese refer to Osamu Tezuka as the god of manga, the god of comics. When I discovered that the god of comics had done his own version of the Monkey King, I just thought, what is the point of me doing it as well? You know, all these amazingly talented Asian cartoonists had done their own takes. I would not add anything to the world by doing my own. So for years, I just set this idea aside. I love the Monkey King, but I didn't see any point in doing my own Monkey King comic. Eventually, I hit on the idea of using the Monkey King as a way of talking about the Asian American experience. I figured none of those Asian cartoonists had ever been an Asian American. So this would be something new that I could add to the world. And I did this in two ways. Number one is I used the Monkey King's shoes as a way of talking about the discomfort that Asian Americans and maybe immigrants' kids in general sometimes feel growing up in a culture that doesn't match that of their parents. This idea of the Monkey King's shoes I didn't get from any of the translations of Journey to the West that I read. I actually got this from my mom. In high school, for an art class, I did a pen and ink drawing of the Monkey King. I thought it turned out pretty awesome, so I brought it home and I showed it to my mom. I said, Mom, look, here's that character. Here's a picture of this character that used to tell me about at bedtime. Don't you think I did an awesome job? My mom is a little bit Asian, so she said, no, you did it wrong. And I said, what did I do wrong? I gave him the monkey face. He has a giant stick that he beats people with. What did I possibly do wrong? And she points to his feet and she said, you drew the Monkey King barefoot, and the Monkey King always wears shoes. So I asked her, why would a monkey wear shoes? They have these awesome hand-like feet. If they had shoes on, they wouldn't be able to use them. And she said, the Monkey King always wears shoes because he's ashamed of being a monkey. I'm not totally sure where my mom got that. I don't know if it's because the translations of Journey to the West that I read were abridged, or if this idea came from some source that was local to where my mom grew up. But I thought it was a great way of talking about that discomfort that immigrant kids sometimes feel. The second thing I did was I wanted the Monkey King story to be like a mythological foundation for everything else that happens in the book. In the original Journey to the West, the Monkey King gets buried under this mountain of rock for 500 years, and he's buried by a deity who is basically Buddha. In fact, a lot of Chinese scholars believe that Journey to the West is kind of like Buddhist propaganda against Taoism. Back then, those were the two competing religions. So that's why, if you read Journey to the West, Monkey King and all of his friends are constantly peeing on Taoist sculptures and Taoist temples and Taoist people. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to make the mythological foundation for American-born Chinese a combination of Eastern and Western stories, because I figured this was about the Asian American experience. So it needed to incorporate both philosophies. So what I did was I took the role of the deity and I gave it to a Chinesified version of the Judeo-Christian God. The words in the word balloons here are actually a paraphrase of a psalm from the Hebrew scriptures, Psalm 139. I also introduced 4 characters that weren't in the original Journey to the West: the human, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. These 4 characters show up in the very last book of the Christian scriptures. They show up in the book of Revelation. A lot of Christian scholars believe that they represent the 4 Christian gospels, but they actually predate Christianity. If you look at old pre-Christian European art and literature, these 4 characters show up all over the place. They are deeply, deeply Western characters. Again, I wanted to put them in as a way of making my version of the Monkey King more Asian American. So that is the first storyline. The second storyline is about a young Chinese American boy named Gene Luen Yang who grows up in a predominantly white neighborhood. A lot of folks have asked me if I looked like Gene when I was a kid, and I did not. Gene looks more like my little brother. This is going to surprise you, but as a kid, I looked more like this kid with the glasses in the back here. I know a lot of you are looking at me going, wow, that guy kind of looks like Asian Vin Diesel. But that's what I looked like as a kid. In the book, Jin's parents come over to the United States for graduate school, just like my parents did. Jin's mom works at a cannery to make her tuition payments. And that I actually got from my mom. My mom actually did this. When she first came to the States, she worked at a cannery in order to make her tuition payments. Jin's dad sells wigs door to door. This is not true of my dad. My dad actually worked as a busboy and then later a waiter at these different San Francisco restaurants. This idea of selling wigs door to door, I got from my father-in-law. I'm married to a Korean American, and her dad, just like my parents, came over to the United States for graduate school. He actually did this. He went to Columbia, and after class every day, he would take a backpack full of wigs. He'd walk around the neighborhoods just outside of his campus. He'd yell, wigs, wigs, and people would actually come out of their apartments to buy wigs out of his backpack. I thought it was such a crazy thing that I wanted to include into my book. And it ended up being a really good idea, too, because I'm not sure that my father-in-law liked me before he saw that panel. In the book, Jin's parents meet in the library of San Francisco State University. And that is almost the same as my parents. My parents did meet in a library, but for them, it was the library of San Jose State University. So nerdiness runs really deep in my family. In the book, I have this one character. His name is Timmy. He's the brown-haired character here. And a lot of the racially insensitive things that are said in the book are said by this character, Timmy. Timmy is actually based on a group of boys that I knew when I was in junior high. I don't know if this is true in Colorado, but in California, where I grew up, it seems like junior high has this way of bringing out the jerk in people. So people who are normally nice people, right? They're nice when they're little kids, they're nice when they're adults. For some reason, when they get into junior high, they become these raging jerks. At my junior high, there's this group of boys that we used to call the stoners. I'm sure you don't have these people in California, in Colorado either. But these stoners, they would wear these heavy metal T-shirts. They would wear ripped jeans. There were rumors that they did really terrible things in the back parking lot after school. And whenever this group of stoners would pass my group of friends, I hung out with a small group of Asian American boys at the time, they would almost always say something inappropriate to us, something culturally insensitive. I took a lot of the words that I heard in the hallways of my junior high and I stuck them in the mouth of my character Timmy. Now, as an adult, I look back and I realize that this interaction, this daily interaction that we used to have with this other group of boys really did have an effect on me. They really did have an effect on how I saw my place in that school. I realized that junior high was the first time I started feeling uncomfortable hanging out with my non-Asian classmates, my non-Asian American classmates. And I think the reason was, deep inside my little 7th grade mind, I worried that what these stoners were saying were thoughts that pretty much all of my non-Asian classmates were having. So I always wondered, were they saying things that everybody else was just too scared to say? Now as an adult, I can look back and I can realize that that's probably not the case, that all of my classmates were actually really good people. But in my own insecurity as a 7th grader, I remember having those feelings. I said that junior high had a way of bringing out the jerk in people. That was certainly true of me and my friends. There were actually 2 groups of Asian American boys at my junior high. There were my group of friends. Now, most of us were either born in the United States or we came when we were really, really young. We spoke English to each other. We didn't really have accents. We would wear American clothes. We would watch American movies. We would listen to American music. And then there was this other group of Asian American boys. They came when they were much older. They came when they were 4th or 5th or 6th grade. They spoke to each other in their native tongues. They spoke English with accents. They'd wear these funny clothes that they bought in Taiwan with misspelled English words. They'd watch Asian movies. They'd listen to Asian music. And we had this weird relationship. These 2 groups of boys had this weird relationship. First, we were kind of friends with them. Whenever they needed help in class, we'd help them out. We'd say hi to them in the halls. But then, whenever we were in a larger context, we would want to make sure that people understood we were 2 separate groups. Then behind their backs, we would constantly make fun of them. We'd call them fresh off the boats, FOBs. This weird frenemy dynamic I wanted to capture as well in my book. So that was kind of the basis of the friendship between Jin and Wei Chen. As an adult, I had a realization about this weird dynamic between these 2 groups of boys as well. I realized that the way we treated these other kids had nothing to do with who they were or what they had done or what they had said, and it had everything to do with how we felt about ourselves. In junior high, we were beginning to become uncomfortable with our own cultural heritage, and the way we acted that out was we took it out on this other group of boys. So that is the second storyline. The last storyline is by far the most controversial. The main character is named Cousin Chinky, and he's basically the amalgamation of all the negative Asian American, Chinese, and Chinese American stereotypes that I could think of. Right before the book came out, my publisher actually sent review copies to all these independent bookstores all over America. Several Asian American-owned bookstores flipped through this book, saw this character, and refused to carry the book. I ended up having to write this essay. It was almost like getting punished in high school. You know how in high school your teachers make you write these essays when you do something wrong? That's kind of like what I had to do. I had to write this essay about what I was trying to do with this character. That got posted up on my publisher's website. Those Asian American bookstore owners read that essay, and that convinced them to read the book. Nowadays, they're among my most ardent supporters, but it took a little while for us to get from there to here. What I'm going to share with you now is basically what I talked about in that essay. I got married in the year 2000, and right before I got married, I went back to my parents' house, and I cleaned out my old childhood bedroom. When I was doing this, I found a little notebook that I had kept when I was in 2nd grade. It was full of stupid little writings and drawings. This is the table of contents of that notebook. Now, in this notebook, I found this cartoon that I drew as a 2nd grader. In case you can't see what's going on, there are 2 characters on this page. The top character has slant eyes and buck teeth, and he's saying, "Me Chinese, me play joke, me go pee-pee in your Coke." And there's this kid at the bottom, this blonde kid, who's spitting out his Coke. Now, when I saw this as an adult, I didn't remember drawing it. But I was a little bit shocked. I wondered if my 2nd grade self understood the implications of this. Now, my 2nd grade self must have heard that pee-pee joke somewhere on the playground. And I wondered, when I heard that on the playground in 2nd grade, did I understand that that joke was probably directed at me? I also wondered, between these 2 characters, did my 2nd grade self identify more with the character at the top of the page or the character at the bottom? If you look at all of the creative writing that I did throughout my elementary school years, I almost always had a young white male protagonist as my main character. So my guess is that when I was in 2nd grade, I thought of myself more as the blonde kid at the bottom, spitting out his Coke. That's what this Cousin Chinky storyline is. It's me taking this drawing that I did when I was in 2nd grade and fleshing it out into a full-fledged storyline. Cousin Chinky is the character at the top. The character at the bottom becomes Cousin Danny. And I even included the pee-pee joke in one of my panels. To fill out the Cousin Chinky character, I pulled from 2 really different kinds of sources. For what he looks like and what he wears, I pulled from old sources. Then for what he says and what he does, I pulled from much newer sources. So for what he looks like and what he wears, I pulled from sources like this. This is a political cartoon from the late 1800s. Back then, America was seeing this huge influx of Chinese immigrant workers. And a lot of Americans became worried about how all these immigrants were going to affect American culture. So pressure began to build on Congress to do something about it. Newspapers all over America started publishing cartoons like this. And this is actually one of the more mild ones, but they would feature very stereotypical images of the Chinese at the time, wearing a very simplified version of traditional Chinese clothing. Eventually, people behind images like this actually won. In the late 1800s, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which effectively ended all legal immigration from China into the United States for decades. So from images like this, I pulled Cousin Chinky's facial expressions, his facial features, and also his clothing. This kind of stuff wasn't just limited to political cartoons. It was also found in early comic books. You've all heard of Batman, I'm sure. Did you know that Batman did not debut in a comic book series called Batman? He actually debuted in a comic book series called Detective Comics. Did you all know that? Well, if you go home and you go to your grandparents' house and you dig around in their attic, if you can find this issue of Detective Comics, you'll be able to sell it, pay for a new house, a new car, maybe even a small island. This thing is worth a ton of money. Now, what a lot of people don't realize, even comic book geeks, even Batman geeks, is that Batman, even though Batman debuted in Detective Comics did not debut with Batman. Batman didn't show up until issue number 27. For issue number 1, the publishers decided to go with the character that they felt like was much more marketable and appealing than any of the heroic characters that they had in their stable. This is what Detective Comics number 1 looks like. The main character's name is Qing Lung. He is what we would refer to now as a yellow peril villain, as a character who's designed to play on the fears that the Americans had of the Chinese at the time. He is a Chinese super genius bent on taking over the Western world. From characters like this, I pulled Cousin Chinky's blank eyes and his menacing grin. So for what he says and what he looks like, I pulled from old sources. For what he does, I'm sorry, for what he looks like and what he wears, I pulled from old sources. For what he does and what he says, I pull from much newer sources. One of the craziest things that Cousin Chinky says is in a cafeteria scene where he offers Cousin Danny a bite of his crispy fried cat gizzards with noodles. This phrase, crispy fried cat gizzards with noodles, I actually got from an American political cartoon. But it wasn't an American political cartoon that was published in the 1800s. It was actually an American political cartoon that was published in 2001 while I was working on the book. That year in April, there was an incident between China and America. An American spy plane went down in or around Chinese airspace, and there's a dispute between the two countries as to what should happen next. To comment on the Chinese spy plane crisis, an American political cartoonist by the name of Pat Oliphant, a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist published in hundreds of newspapers, did a cartoon of Uncle Sam going into a Chinese restaurant and being served by a slant-eyed buck-toothed waiter. And he is served a plate of crispy fried cat gizzards with noodles. I actually saw this in my local newspaper the morning it was published, and I was a little bit shocked because I immediately recognized that Oliphant was pulling from those same roots that date back to the 1800s. I was like, it is 2001. What is going on? I followed the story because I thought something big was going to happen. I thought the newspapers who had published the book or the cartoon would be asked to apologize. I thought Oliphant himself would have to issue some kind of statement. Nothing really happened. A few small Asian American political groups wrote letters of protest against the use of this imagery. As far as I know, none of the newspapers responded. And Oliphant himself, in a talk that he gave a few months later, actually made fun of people who were offended by this cartoon. I was mad at it, so I decided to reference it in my book. Now, I am the child of the 1800s. I'm a child of 1800s. I'm a child of the 1980s. I'm a child of the 1980s. Asian American men my age have a very ambivalent love-hate relationship with this guy named John Hughes. Y'all know who he is? John Hughes is an American movie director. He's largely seen as the master of the American teenage movie. He did this movie called Home Alone. Have you all seen that? He did this other movie called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. In the 80s, he had a string of hits that were all about teenage life during the 80s. And in one of his movies called 16 Candles, he has this character called Long Duck Dong. The reason why we have, Asian American men my age have this love-hate relationship with John Hughes is that first, we recognize that he is kind of a genius. His movies are kind of awesome. They really capture something about what it was like to grow up in the 80s. But then this character, Long Duck Dong, is kind of nutty. He's a Chinese exchange student who's played by a Japanese-American actor. The actor himself can speak perfect English. Long Duck Dong speaks in this crazy accent. Every time he comes on screen, a gong goes off. And Long Duck Dong is obsessed with getting an American girlfriend, a white girlfriend. What would happen in the 80s was our friends would go and watch 16 Candles when they come back to school and start calling us Long Duck Dong. That's where the love-hate comes from. That's where the hate part of the love-hate comes from. This was such an important part of my childhood that I wanted to make a reference to it. So I gave Cousin Chinky that same obsession with getting an American girlfriend. You've all seen American Idol, I'm sure, right? So you know how a season of American Idol goes. In the first episodes of every season, we see all these people, all these singers, who will definitely never have a career as professional singers, right? What they'll usually do is they'll go on screen, they'll do a crazy performance, we'll all kind of cringe, and then they'll disappear, and we'll never hear from them again. Well, several years ago, there was this guy, his name was William Hung. He was an engineering student from UC Berkeley, and he was one of these folks. He came on in one of the early episodes of a season. His performance was not very good at all, but then afterwards, he did not disappear. Afterwards, he actually became an internet phenomenon. His performance on American Idol got uploaded to YouTube. Within a few days, this little YouTube clip got millions of hits, and this guy became a minor celebrity. William Hung became a minor celebrity. He got invited onto different talk shows. He ended up having these fan clubs pop up all over the internet. He ended up even cutting an album. Among Asian Americans and Asian American circles, William Hung is kind of a controversial figure because there are two ways of interpreting his popularity. One way is this. Some people believe that we admire him because of his courage. On his performance on American Idol, he does this terrible job, and at the end, he says to Paul Abdul, one of the judges at the time, he says, you know, I did my best, and I'm proud that I did my best. So people think, maybe we admire William Hung because even though he has this complete and utter lack of talent, he's still willing to go on national TV and give it his all. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is maybe America became fascinated with William Hung for the same reason why we find monkeys in tuxedos fascinating. Monkeys in tuxedos are fascinating because monkeys don't belong in tuxedos. On his performance, during his performance on American Idol, William Hung exhibited a lot of the characteristics that we commonly associate with those images from the 1800s. He doesn't have very good teeth. He's kind of short. He's kind of awkward when he dances. He's saying with an accent. He's the stereotypical Asian guy. And maybe stereotypical Asian guys don't belong on American Idol. I have to tell you, I don't know which side of that controversy I fall on, but I felt like it was an interesting and important enough discussion that I wanted to reference it in my book. And that's why I included this scene in American Born Chinese where Cousin Chinky actually jumps on this table in his library and sings Ricky Martin's She Bangs, which is the same song that William Hung performs on American Idol. The very last panel in the book, which I've heard they've actually taken out. My publisher actually took out of the most recent edition. I'm kind of sad about that. I'm going to try to get them to put it back in. But the very last panel in the book is supposed to be this one at the bottom of the screen right here. This is Jin and Wei Chen wearing Rockets jerseys, lip syncing on a YouTube video. This is a reference to another YouTube phenomenon. Several years ago, two Chinese college students were bored. They decided to record themselves lip syncing to a Backstreet Boys song. They uploaded it to YouTube, and just like William Hung, within a few days, they had become these phenomena. Their clip gets downloaded millions of times. They get so popular that they actually become minor celebrities. Motorola even hires these two guys to be their official spokespeople in China for a little bit. I wanted to include a reference to these two guys. They call themselves the Backdorm Boys because I feel like they offer a good contrast to William Hung. Here are two internet phenomena. They both received millions of hits in a very short period of time. They're both considered funny. They both feature Asian or Asian American young men performing American pop music. But I think they're funny for really different reasons. William Hung, I don't think he means to be funny. And in a lot of ways, I feel like he's being used by American pop culture for humor. Backdorm Boys, if you watch their performance, it is very apparent that they mean to be funny. They want you to laugh. In a lot of ways, I think they're using American pop culture for humor. They're actually kind of making fun of the melodrama that comes along with a lot of that boy band music. So that is the second storyline. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why I decided to choose to tell the story as comics. I already told you how I grew up loving stories. I also grew up drawing. My mom tells me that I started drawing when I was 2 years old, and I basically never stopped. So naturally, when you take stories and drawing and you add them together, you get animation. When I was a kid, I loved animation. I loved watching animated movies and animated TV shows. In fact, when I was young, my lifelong ambition was to grow up to work for this guy. In 3rd grade, my teacher made us do these biography reports. I chose to do mine on Walt Disney, and after that, I got kind of obsessed with him. I would go to the library and I'd check out as many books as I could about his life. I would practice drawing in that classic Disney style. I remember going to the mall and going to the poster shop and buying a poster-sized headshot of Walt Disney. Not Disneyland, not any of the Disney movies, just Walt Disney's head. I put it up over my bed in my bedroom. My friends would come over and they go, "Why do you have this picture of a creepy old man in your bedroom?" And I have to tell them, that's not just any creepy old man, that is Walt Disney. So I really wanted to be a Disney animator. I desperately wanted to be a Disney animator until one night in 5th grade when my mom took me to our local bookstore and I saw this issue of Marvel 2-in-1 on that spinner rack. Back when I was growing up, they had these wireframe racks called spinner racks that would carry a month's worth of comics. You could spin them so that you could see them all. Now, I'm pretty sure before this night I'd seen comics before, and I may have even read comics before. But for some reason, as soon as I saw this cover, I knew in the depths of my being that I wanted to own it. So I brought it up to my mom. I said, Mom, from the depths of my being, I want to own this. Will you please buy it for me? She took one look at this cover and she said, no, absolutely not. Those two characters look way too scary and they're going to give you nightmares. And she had a point, because even though I was in 5th grade, I was still getting nightmares. So she made me put this back. To this day, I have no idea what the story's about. Instead, my mom actually bought me this. This was the latest Superman comic. Even though I'm the Superman writer now, when I was in 5th grade, I was not a fan. I thought Superman was kind of a boring guy. He did not look nearly as interesting as Rom or Thing, who were on the other covers. You know, he's kind of good looking. He looks like Clark Gable. He flies around in this blue uniform, like this giant flying Boy Scout doing good. I was just not very excited about this book. But I brought it home and I read it anyways. And in this book, the atomic bomb drops in 1986. It's 1984 as I'm reading it. The atomic bomb drops. It kills off most of the world's population. The few remnants of humanity that are left, they gather themselves in these little villages that are pretty lawless. So a group of men have to get together, dress up in medieval-style armor, and ride around the countryside on these giant mutated dogs to fight crime. They call themselves the Atomic Knights. Superman's a survivor, because he's Superman, and he teams up with these Atomic Knights to have an adventure. In the last few pages of the story, it's revealed that the whole thing is actually just a dream that somebody's having. But that did not stop this book from completely freaking me out. I stayed up nights thinking about it, thinking about the bomb, thinking about Superman and mutated dogs and Atomic Knights, and thinking about comic books, thinking about how this combination of words and still pictures had done something inside my brain that had never been done before. So all throughout high school, I had this dilemma. When I grew up, did I want to become a cartoonist, somebody who made comics, or did I want to stick with my original plan of being an animator? In college, I took an animation class that kind of sealed the deal for me. The class was 6 weeks long. It was during a summer. And in the 6 weeks, I produced maybe 3 minutes of animation. I realized that animation is so labor-intensive that it's very difficult for one person to have complete control over a project. Comics is also labor-intensive. It takes a long time to make a comic. But it's still manageable enough to have one person control the whole thing from beginning to end. And I have to tell you, I'm kind of a control freak. I really want that control because I want to be able to tell a story exactly the way I want it. And that's why I decided, even though you can't really get health insurance through comics, I decided to go with comics instead. So let me end by telling you a little bit about my most recent project. And then if you all have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Secret Coders is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I taught computer science at a high school in Oakland for 17 years. And I taught in this really visual way. I would draw on the board whenever I taught. And I always thought these lessons could translate very well into comic book form. So I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I finally got to do it. This book came out this past September. This is a joint project between me and a friend of mine named Mike Holmes. I did the story and he did the art. I'm very jealous of Mike. First, because he is an amazing artist. He has this Saturday morning energy to his art that I just don't have in mine. And second, he has this really fluffy beard. And I can't grow a beard to save my life. Our book is about 3 7th graders who learn how to code and level up. What I like to do is I like to have each of my characters be based on a real world person. So Hopper, my main character, is a young woman who's based on one of the most famous coders in the history of computer science, a woman by the name of Grace Hopper. Grace Hopper invented something called the compiler, which is used by practically every coder today. If you're a coder, you know what a compiler is. It's something that allows people to program in a language that they are really comfortable with, in a language that mimics human languages. Hopper's best friend is a kid named Ennie, and Ennie is really good at 2 things. He's really good at basketball, and he's really good at coding. Ennie is inspired by somebody from the real world as well. He is inspired by this person right here. You all know who this is? Any basketball fans? This is Chris Bosh. He plays for the Miami Heat. He's a 2-time NBA champion, so he has 2 championship rings. What a lot of people don't realize about Chris Bosh is that he is not just one of the world's best basketball players. He is also a straight-up nerd. His mom was a systems analyst. His dad was an engineer. When he was in high school, he was not just on the varsity basketball team. He was also part of his school's math club. So he wasn't just an athlete, he was also a mathlete. He was on his school's National Honor Society. He gets into college. He plans to major in computer imaging and graphic design. But then he gets so good at basketball that he has to leave to go play for the NBA. Even now with his NBA millions, he actually invests a lot of money in tech companies simply because he loves computers so much. A lot of people think of computers and basketball, school and sports as these two separate worlds, but they're really not. A lot of people can combine both, people like Chris Bosch. The last of my main characters is a spiky-haired kid named Josh. Josh starts off in the book as kind of a jerk. Secret Coder is actually a 6-volume graphic novel. It's a 6-volume graphic novel series. So by the time we get to volume 2 and 3, he actually becomes pretty good friends with the other two characters. Josh is actually based on a real-world jerk that I know. My brother-in-law, Louis. Louis and I are actually pretty good friends, but he likes to make fun of me all the time. That's why I wanted to do some kind of a character who was a jerk who kind of looked like him. Now, Louis is not a coder at all. He's actually a surgeon, but he loves computers. So what he does is, by day, he goes to his hospital and he opens up his patients and he works on them. And then at night, for fun, he goes home and he opens up his computer and he works on it. I don't know, he loves computers so much, I don't know why he didn't become a coder, but he does make a pretty good living as a surgeon. Mike and I, the way we're describing our book is we're telling people that it is kind of like Harry Potter. So you all know how Harry Potter goes, right? A group of kids find their secret school. The secret school teaches them magic so they become wizards. Our book is almost like that. It's about a group of kids who find their secret school. The secret school teaches them coding and they become coders. Harry Potter has a problem. Great series. I'm not saying it's not great, but it does have a problem. And the problem is that you read about these kids learning magic and becoming wizards, and you go home and you try those same things. Do you get to be a wizard? No, you do not. Our series does not have that same problem. You read about these kids becoming coders, you go home and you try these same things, you also will become a coder. In the very first volume, I try to cover multiple concepts. One of the concepts that I cover is binary. Does anyone know how to read binary? You don't know what binary is? Okay, a couple of you. Well, by the end of this presentation, when I'm done in like 3 minutes here, all of you will know how to read binary, okay? Binary is a number system that's made up of only ones and zeros. At the heart of every computer, it can only understand ones and zeros. So everything that you see on a computer is actually translated into binary. Every number, every letter, every color, every sound. Everything's in binary deep inside. What I'm going to share with you right now is from the very first book. Hopper, the main character, switches schools. She's the new girl at school. She starts off her school in a really bad way. She ends up getting into a fight with Annie, and she ends up spitting on him. This is actually something that is based on something that I did when I was a kid. Really terrible. I'm very ashamed. But then she spits on him, and then the bell rings, and they have to go to class, and now it's lunchtime, and she wants friends. The words in the caption are hers. So she says, "At lunch, I found a spot under a tree near the tables. When kids walked by, I smiled as big as I could. Nothing charms people like a big smile," my dad used to say. Someone's got to invite a charming girl like me to their table, right? 20 minutes later, reality set in. Guess I'm not as charming as I thought. Looks like it's just you and me, creepy bird. Want to hear me speak Mandarin in a robot voice? Whoa, friendly little guy. Yikes! Hey, why do you wear earrings shaped like sevens? Double yikes! You here to deck me? No, I'm here to ask you, what's with the sevens? My jersey number for my old team. Why aren't you going to try to deck me? If it's because I'm a girl, I don't need that kind of pity. I have 3 older sisters. I've fought girls before. Oh, listen, maybe I was out of line this morning. I know you didn't mean to. Shh, I'm thinking. This bird has 3 eyes open. I know, right? I thought I'd imagined that. You've helped me figure something out. I've wondered for years. Wondered what? Why there are 9s on all the buildings. Isn't that just the school street number? Yeah, but why would you need to show the street number inside the school? I think somebody wants these birds to look normal with 2 eyes. Your earrings confirm a suspicion I've had since the first grade. These birds are robots, and their eyes display binary numbers. What are you talking about? Binary is how computers store numbers. Every computer has these, they're like switches that can be on or off. A number is stored as a sequence of on and off switches, or in the bird's case, open and closed eyes. You make no sense. Take these 7 pennies. Let's play a game. So this game that they're going to play, we're also going to play. So pay attention. I'm going to give you the rules just right now. I'm going to draw the board right here. You always carry pennies and chalk in your pocket? Shh, I'm concentrating on my drawing. Now look, I've got 4 columns of boxes here. The first column has 8 boxes, then 4, then 2, and then 1. I want you to fit all 7 of these pennies into these boxes, but there's a catch. When you're done, each column has to be either completely full or completely empty. No half-filled columns. And there's only one solution. So does anyone think that they can actually do this? I actually have a game board right here that is just like the game board that Annie drew. I have 7 pennies. Do you think you can fit those 7 pennies into those columns? No half-filled columns. Every column has to be either completely full or completely empty when you're done. Anyone think you can do it? You want to try it? Come on up. Come on up. Thanks for coming up. What's your name?
Tobin.
Tobin, okay. All right, let's give Tobin a round of applause. Thank you, Tobin. You can go sit down again. Let's take a look at the solution. Are there any half-filled columns? No, so he did it right. Now what happens is, in this game, every empty column represents a 0 or an off, and every full column represents a 1 or an on. So that means 7 in binary is 0, 1, 1, 1. Make sense? So I'm going to add two more pennies, and let's try it one more time. Does somebody think you can do it with 9? Anyone want to try it with 9? Okay, come on up. What's your name?
Kellen.
Kellen. Nice to meet you. All right, let's give Kellen a round of applause. You can go back. Go ahead. And let's take a look at the solution. Are there any half-filled columns? No half-filled columns. So he did it right. That means 9 in binary is 1, 0, 0, 1. Does that make sense? So now you all know how to read binary. In the book continues. Hopper comes up with the same solution for 7 as we did here. And he says, good. Now, under every empty column, I'm going to draw a closed eye. And under all the full columns, I'm going to draw open eyes. And Hopper realizes that 7 and closed, open, 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 or 0, 1, 1, 1, or off, on, are all the same thing. So the bird really was displaying 7 in binary with its eyes. So closed, open, open, open means 7 in binary? Yes, or off, on, if you're using switches. When that bird saw the 7s on your ears, it displayed 7 with its eyes. Where did you learn this? My dad's a software engineer. Come here, bird. Look at what I wrote here. See, whoever put those 9s all over the school wants the birds to keep their 2 middle eyes closed so they'll look like normal birds. What a weird school. Tell me about it. Something about this whole place has bugged me since kindergarten. Like it's haunted, but not by ghosts. Bring. Well, I'll see you around. Hey, stop. What's your name? Annie. I'm Hopper. Good to meet you, Hopper. Spit on me again and I'll deck you. So are we friends now or what? Annie was such a weirdo. He was right about one thing though. Something about the whole place bugged me too. Secret Coders, 6-book series. We also have a website that supports it. I have video lessons on there if you want to get started with coding. I also have, you guys have a makerspace here, right, with 3D printers. I have an STL file for an action figure of the little robot of a little robot turtle character from the book. So you can download that and print it up on your 3D printer here if you want. Thank you again so much for this time. It was great to talk to you all. Thank you.